G'day guys, Dean here. I want to show you how I target barramundi using Lowrance's ActiveTarget 2. The main setting that I'm going to run when I'm targeting barramundi, whether that be in impoundments or in the salt, is Scout mode. The majority of barramundi that I target will all be fairly shallow because that's where the active fish like to hang out. So Scout mode is ideal for that. You can set it at a position so that I can see where my cast lands, and I can tilt the pole a little bit if they're a little bit deeper to then see exactly where that barramundi is. Or if they're shallow enough, you'll see your cast and your fish in the same line. So what I'm using to target this barramundi is what we call Scout mode. That is a wider angle and a shallower beam. So I'm fortunate enough at the moment that the barramundi is sitting shallow enough that I can see my cast land and I can see the barramundi at the same time. So that's a perfect scenario. The only variable is I'm not 100% sure how deep those fish are. So they could be anywhere from 1 to almost 4 meters down. So what you can do when you get to an area that you understand, these are open water barramundi. So now I don't know what depth they're at. So I can switch my transducer over to forward mode. I can watch the barramundi and then I can see the depth that the majority of the fish are traveling at and use that as my gauge to then target them. So what we'll do now, we'll switch the pole over to forward mode. That way we can look at the depth that the barramundi are sitting at and understand our retrieve speed and sink rate of our lure. So back on the screen, I prefer not to run my mode in auto. Change the mode from Scout, which we were in before, to forward. Now with the depth, I don't really want to be looking at 18 meters, it's way too deep. So we'll change it to 8 meters, for example. And we'll try and find barramundi to see what depth they're sitting in. There's a couple, there's a giant right there, the size of that fish. And he's only sitting basically 2 meters deep. Very, very shallow. So if I cast my lure out to the side now, my lure is tracking just behind and above that. Oh, I hit that fish. Hit that big fish. That's my lure tracking through there. I didn't speed it up enough, so I hit that fish in the back, which is the worst case scenario for the size of that fish. So what we'll do when there's no fish there, so we can understand what's going on, I'll cast my lure out. Let it hit the water. There's my lure sinking there. So that's about 5 seconds already. Now if I do this, retrieve speed, you can see that lure is tracking perfectly horizontal at that speed. So that's what you need to understand. So I can go, okay, at about 1 second per turn and a 3 to 5 second sink. That's the depth I'm at. So there's a big barramundi sitting right there, but you'll notice that everything is on an angle because I need to push my pole up, down, and every time I rotate my pole, it affects the angle. And if you want to stop that, simply go into an option called Stable View, and now it will control pretty much keeping your screen in the right plane without you having to worry about bending your pole all over the place. So now that we understand our lure depth and our retrieve speed, we'll switch it back to Scout mode. Simply loosen this off, turn it back to the middle, loosen this one off and square it off. So back in here, menu, mode, Scout. If you go to auto, it'll select Scout anyway, but I like to just run it in the mode. That way it doesn't adjust any of my depths or lengths. For the tackle that you run, I'm running a 300 size high gear ratio reel. A couple of reasons for that. With the high gear ratio and the 300 size, the amount of line I have the ability or capacity to get back in is pretty high. So that enables me to have full control over my lure at all times. And if I mess up a cast, I can quickly get it back in. Running the big single handle then sort of allows me that if I need to, or when my lure is in the right spot, I can then slow down pretty easily as well without having to worry about being too quick and lifting that lure too high in the column. When you do line up a fish and you're in the same path as them, it's important to remember the retrieve speed that you worked out and the sink rate that you worked out, so that lure comes past their nose at just the right depth. What I like to do is cast about 5 meters past a fish, typically underhand cast to try and minimise the noise from the landing, and then swim the lure past the nose of the fish anywhere from 1 to 2 meters if it's like clear water and they're interested. If they're not interested at all, you literally need to put it right on their nose. So when you notice a barramundi travelling around on the screen, pay to sit there and watch them for a little while. When you see one travelling across the screen, you want to lead them just a tiny bit with your cast so that lure is a fair way past them, plus also in front of the trajectory where they're travelling, because you want to bring this past naturally in front of their nose, not so much over their back, from behind them or from the side, because that's just going to spook those fish. I like to move my pole around because I'm up the front and I'm in control of what's going on. But if you're down the back, if you leave your pole pointing straight out the back of the boat, when you're standing there and watching those fish, it's very easy to then cast and know exactly where those fish are. If you want to move your pole, I typically set it up so that I'm looking straight down the barrel of a fish where I want to cast. Then I can send the lure out and have it exactly where I want it to be. So I'll go through some basic settings. I run a range on about 24 meters. When I'm on weed beds, I might push it out to 30 because I'm not trying to hit the actual fish. I'm just trying to hit areas where I see them. But for now, we're running 24. Contrast, I'm running 75%. Nose rejection I have off, but you can see as you increase that, clears the screen up a bit. I've got it fairly high. This interference is actually the ripples from the surface of the lake. My colour palette is 3. I don't run a range grid for this type of fishing. When I'm chasing impoundment barramundi, typically you're going to have the back of your boat facing where you want to cast. So what I like to do is just leave the transducer basically pointing in a dead straight line. So now everybody that's on the back of the boat can look at the image and understand where that weed bed is or where those fish are grouping up in comparison to how the boat is facing. What I like to do when I first get to an area where I've found fish is just sit there and watch them for a little bit. It's very difficult at times to target an individual fish, especially barramundi. They just move super fast between areas. But if you watch them, they're not actually just running around randomly. They move from one weed pile and they interact there for a little while. Then they use the same path and track over to another weed pile or a rock point or even some sort of underwater structure like timber. They might hang around there for a bit, then they'll either move on or they go back to that first spot. Then what I like to do is I understand that they like to hang out on that particular weed pile. You pick a point on the horizon, whether it be a mountain or the back of a bay or some sort of tree, and you can say, okay, well in that line from where I'm sitting, if I cast that area, I'm always going to go across that active section of barramundi, and that's going to increase my chances on getting a bite. So that's basically it for targeting barramundi using ActiveTarget 2.